Welcome everybody, I'm Jeremy John, and I want to take you into the fascinating world of tour guiding. Every day in London, you'll find eccentric personalities guiding people in the footsteps of history. Some show historic architecture to overseas visitors, while others bring history to life for school groups. All the best tour guides have one thing in common. They know how to tell a good story. And that's why I started this podcast, to capture the stories of these tour guides. You will find out what drew them to this profession. You will discover which sites they love the most. And you will hear the secret methods they use to make history come alive. Today, I have two guides on the show, both based in London. I have Matt Gedge.
Hello.
And I have Paul Harrison.
Hello.
Matt, let's start with you. Matt, what do you do in London?
Hi, Jeremy. I run a tour company called Fun London Tours. So we've been going for nearly 11 years now, and I'm a full-time professional guide, design tours, and I've been on the City of London and City of Westminster tour guiding courses as well. I'm an ex-open-top bus tour guide as well.
Splendid stuff. And Paul, can I ask you what you do?
I spend most of my time working for Matt. So I do some of his tours. I take groups to see the Changing of the Guard. We explore streets around Covent Garden, off the Strand, and into the City of London off Fleet Street. And I've been guiding since 2012. So I started the year of the Olympics and spent most of those years on open-top bus tours.
Great. So that means you've been guiding for 11 years.
11 years, yeah. Oh, of course, with the pandemic as well, we had a few weeks off, and it's just
Fantastic. Matt, how many years would it be for you then?
So it's probably 12 years, maybe getting on for 13 years now.
Great. So how many tours do you think you've both given?
Luckily, I keep a tally of that, Jeremy.
He scrawls it onto his wall like a prison cell.
I do. My wall is covered now. Several thousand. I mean, it's in the thousands. Maybe in the thousands for sure.
Maybe, but you're going to say maybe in the tens of thousands. Yeah, that's
hundreds of thousands.
That's an extra digit there. And what about you, Paul? How many are you in the tens of thousands?
Oh my, I wouldn't like to think. Certainly in the open top bus tour days, it was 3 a day, 6 days a week, and for a decade. So yeah, and walking tours on top of that, and ones in between. Yeah, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of the things.
Well, this is why I've got you both on today, because I want to go into, firstly, the backstory of how you got into this. I also want to kind of really interrogate the craft behind tour guiding. Matt, I want to start with you and your backstory. So how did you get into this trade?
So I have a long story and a short story. So I'll pitch somewhere in between. Let's go back. We're going to go back to 2010, just before maybe 2009. So at that point, I was working in a call center. And this was, as many people might know, that this is not exactly the most exciting job you're ever going to have. It's a little bit of a soul-destroying job. And people who work in call centers quite often will end up deciding to make the most of their time by going out every single night and just basically drinking themselves into oblivion. So this is what I was doing for quite a long time, burning the candle at both ends, until eventually went too far, because I'd be literally out all night and then sort of coming into work the next day with about an hour's sleep. So I ended up being hospitalized, and I had pneumonia, which then developed into pleurisy, and then developed into tuberculosis, which is like medieval illness, right? You think that no one is going to have this illness, but ended up in hospital with tuberculosis. And the doctor at that time said if this developed too much further, then I would have probably around a 50% chance of not making it. The guy in the hospital bed next to mine died a couple of days after I went to hospital. And this completely shook me up. So I started to think to myself, all right, I need to really change my life around. So a short while later, I started really thinking about how to change my life. And yeah, I had a period of about 9 months of just recovery. And during that period, I thought, okay, let's leave that job and let's do something I will really enjoy. And basically it just came to me almost like a eureka moment, this divine inspiration. I had this idea that I would become a tour guide. It ticks all the boxes. I love working with people. I love being outside. I love history. London is just my dream city. And so I became a tour guide. I applied for Big Bus, open top bus tours, and got myself on a City of London guiding course. And yeah, took it from there. So it's a long story to get there.
Wow, that is a long story. Paul, can you throw in your long story to the point that you got into it? And then we're going to come back to Matt, because then we've got to hear about your hard slog of actually making it, as they were. Would you feel you've made it? Would that be an expression that you...
Can't you see my gold Rolex watch, Jeremy? Yes, I've got Rolls Royce parked outside.
I don't know if that's the main measure. I think the measure of if you've made it as a tour guide is if other tour guides say hi to you when you walk past. That's worth more than a gold Rolex on your wrist.
You don't go into it for the money. That's for sure.
No. Now, Paul, please, it's your backstory. Go.
Mine starts with less medieval illness, I'm glad to say. So I moved to London for the first time. I lived here a couple of times, 20 years ago now. So I was in my early 20s, and I needed accommodation.
Could I ask, by the way, where did you grow up then? Where were you moving from?
I grew up mainly in Norfolk, so I'm originally from the countryside. And I've lived in all corners of the UK, grew up in Germany a little bit as well. My dad used to be in the Air Force. So I'd always move around. About every 3 years, we would change locations, and I did when I was late teenage years and generally my 20s. But finally moved to London.
And that was, sorry, just to be clear here, you moved to London on your own accord and for
own
a
accord.
purpose?
It was about a girl, as generally these things are. She lived in London already, so my accommodation had fallen through. So ideally I needed a job and I needed accommodation, so I looked for both at the same time. And at the time, I found work working for a language school down in Greenwich. So not quite tour guiding, but you'll be given a group of 20, 30 foreign teenagers, generally from, let's say, from Italy or from China or wherever. And you're responsible for all their activities. So they would do lessons with someone else in the morning, and then the afternoon and evening, sometimes 7 days a week, you'd be out with them. So we would take them to museums, we would take them to, not quite the Change of the Guard, but you'd take them down to Buckingham Palace and all this. Yeah, so I would have the same group for quite a bit of time, which was a joy, but obviously you have to fight with their sort of language abilities as well. And then maybe 10, 11 years ago, I forgot when I said 2012, I, like Matt, I felt I need to kind of level up a little bit to do actual proper tour guiding and actually learn things. And being on an open top bus seemed a fine idea, and they train you up from nothing as well, even though it wasn't quite a nothing. So I started that way, really. And then guided on the tour buses, went into managing tour guides for a little bit, trained tour guides just before the pandemic as well. That's how I started. So I started with foreign language students and then adults, which are much, much easier and better. Less herding kittens, as it was.
Yes. Well, one of the many reasons I do this podcast as well is everyone seems to have a completely different story, and your two stories are entirely different. But where you seem to both collide is 11 years ago, you're on buses. Now, if you were to list sort of one maybe rite of passage that a lot of people that end up being full-time tour guides seem to go through, it is the open-top buses. So let's dwell on that. Matt, you're on the bus. It's your first tour. I mean, it's daunting. You're on a moving vehicle that stops in traffic. You don't know how long it's going to stop for. Many of us also have a sort of maybe a touch of imposter syndrome as well. We think, why these people aren't going to believe a word I'm saying or whatever. Yeah. It's your first tour. What were you feeling then, and how did it all go as the weeks progressed after it?
Well, firstly, lucky that you said about like people might think that they might not believe a word you're saying, because a lot of the stuff that we study in the training, I've subsequently found out is not actually true. But at the time, it was the best we could go on. And I think it's a real sink or swim moment. I had the same thing when I was teaching. So I used to be a teacher for English language students, where your first class, it's that moment it just works. I loved it straight away. So I had that 2.5 hour bus tour, and you kind of get into a groove very quickly. I think the moment you pick up that microphone and you know that you've got enough material to get around on the bus. Adrenaline gets you through. But I think the sort of the moment when I realised that I was doing a good job was when my parents came on the tour. So my parents have got very different ways of looking at things and looking at me, I think. So my dad was just really up for it. So whenever I try and get like some kind of crowd participation, so anyone here from the United States, my dad would go, yeah!
Just to clarify for the listeners, your dad is not from the United States.
He's not from the United
Right,
States
okay.
because he would also say in a terrible Australian accent, yes, when I mention any Australians on the bus. So he was really excited and really enjoyed the whole thing. My mum had this look of terror on her face the whole way. Like for the first 20 minutes, it's like, oh my God, something's going to go wrong. You can't do this. And the moment I realised that I can really do this job was when she relaxed.
Oh.
And
When your mum stopped grimacing.
that was enough for me. I could hang up my microphone at that
That was
point.
the highlight of not only your career, but family life as well.
Yes.
That's very heartwarming. Have you told your mother that?
Yeah, I did. I think I did.
That is a lovely,
yeah, probably would have done
with
yeah.
hindsight.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, look, Paul, what was your first day on the bus like? And do you agree that it's a sort of sink or swim moment?
It was terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. So my training group, maybe like a dozen people, almost everyone were trained actors, which is a very, very common thing in that type of tour guiding. You get actors that are between plays, let's just say, who then will come and do it, one, because they're used to having an audience and can learn things very quickly to a certain level, can learn lines very easily. So they were all learning it like a script, and training was very easy for them. And you pop a microphone in their hand, and instantly they could do it. I was terrified of it. I was terrified of my own amplified voice. I was, so you're not used to hearing your own voice in that sort of way, like coming out of a speaker. Public speaking I was terrified of, because, most people are, aren't they? It's a perfectly natural thing that, if you have to stand up at work and give a presentation for 10 minutes, unless people are used to it in their work, it's a slightly scary thing to do.
It's the biggest fear amongst people in England, isn't it? It's the biggest number one fear is public speaking, I think.
I wonder how uniquely British that is as well.
Yeah.
But the thought of then doing it for 10 minutes in training, because you do just like a small amount of it.
When you say in training, is that almost like your audition to get the job on the bus?
No. Well, yes and no. Yes and no. So you had a small phone audition straight away, so they listened to your voice. Then we were brought into the office. Then you kind of had the job. Then you would do 2 weeks of training on an open top bus with an incredible trainer. But they couldn't have you talking for that long because there's like a dozen people who need to do stuff. So until your very first bus tour, certainly the way that I did it with my company, which was different than Matt's company, we were with rival companies at the time, you had only actually spoken for 10 minutes maximum by that point. So the thought then to be doing it for 2 hours, 2.5 hours, that's on a good day as well. That is perfect traffic. So could be my record for my longest tour is about 5 hours. Open top bus tour, you're talking continuously. We'll get into that stuff later, I guess. But my very first tour, so I had to sign on first thing in the morning. It was myself and another newbie. No other tour guides who worked for the company were there at that point. A very gruff manager stroke controller who didn't become any less gruff over the 10 years that I knew him. Just kind of pointed at a bus, grunted at it, and went, tour. I went, okay. Lovely talking to you.
Yeah. He also say bus.
then a drive, like this is like 9 o'clock in the morning. And it's, I remember when I started 2012, the spring of 2012, until the Olympics started, it just rained every day. Every single, it was like Noah's Ark tours of London.
And are you on the top deck?
On the top.
In the rain?
Yeah.
Where you stand is not sheltered or...
It's partially sheltered. If the bus is moving essentially and you're going through the rain, if that makes sense, then you have a little bit of shelter. The roof is just ahead of where I am.
But obviously most of the people on the bus
are undercover and having a whale of a time.
Oh, they're undercover.
I am, yes. Well, if you have let's say the top quarter, maybe the top third has cover. This is good if it is raining, but obviously on a hot sunny day, then that's not a good thing. But anyway, my first tour, mercifully, originally the start I had no one on, because it was first thing in the morning. And my first customers for the first half an hour was a guy from Scandinavia and his child, his young boy. And I twigged straight away that the dad's English was perfect, but the son's was not. And I saw that he was translating. So it meant that I could say a couple of sentences, then big pause, because they're my only customers. He would translate as I thought of the next couple of sentences that I would next say. And it was just this lovely rhythm, just calm, and on the left is this. Fact.
At this point, because I have a vision for you of you on the bus with a microphone standing in front of the... Did you ditch the microphone at this point?
No.
Talk to them?
No. I was 100% on the mic.
Okay.
Very, very much. But that is a thing that when you only, first thing in the morning in particular, when you only have a couple of customers, that as Matt says, you drop the mic and you go and talk to them. And it's a very beautiful, personable tour, like a private tour, till more people join. But no, this was my very, very first tour. But they were wonderful. And then we get about halfway through and more people have joined. But by that point, I had confidence. And we're halfway, and we're at the Tower of London stop. And we're fullish by this point, and I'm into it. I'm very much into it. And sometimes customers will ask you, like, oh, how long have you been doing this? And the joke always is, like, let's say you're half an hour into your walking tour, let's say now, and someone will say, like, oh, how long have you been a tour guide for? Or you always say, like, however into the tour you already are. So, oh, how long have you been a guide for? Oh, half an hour. And it goes, I got asked that tour how long I'd been a tour guide for. And the true answer was an hour. By that. But yeah, the rush when I finished that first tour was amazing. After that first tour, I was fine.
This is fascinating because you've both Matt talked about adrenaline, you're saying a rush here and, a kind of buzz. Sarah Pascal, the comedian, I'm sure you're both aware, did start as a tour guide, but I remember her talking about in comedy, she calls it a laughter crack, she said. She said the minute she got that hit, that rush to her brain that she was on stage, she'd told that joke and people had laughed at something she'd crafted. That was it for her. There was no looking back. But that's, in the comedy world. Would you say that adrenaline, that buzz, that feeling is what kept you progressing? I mean, we're sat here now, all of us have been doing this for many, many years. As we say, thousands, tens of thousands of tours. Would you say that was the kind of motivating factor that also has progressed you into other forms of tour guiding and tours and so on? And could you do a tour if you didn't get that buzz?
God, that's a really good question. It's part of the reason why it's so addictive. I'm sure that's a big part of it. I'd say that I struggled more with being able to deal with what happened after a tour. So you'd have the tour where you're like on top of the world, it's really exciting, everything's, you're getting a real buzz, you're sort of involved with people, and then suddenly afterwards, you're on your own. Yeah, so that moment afterwards, it's just I struggle to deal with the real peaks and troughs of tour guiding, because there is that buzz. And I know comedians talk about that a lot as well, where they're on stage and it's dealing with that lull afterwards.
My girlfriend found it hard. I mean, so you're talking non-stop all day, non-stop, far beyond the amount of time that any normal person ever would do. Like I would always describe it, particularly the open top bus stuff, it's like a one-man show for 3 hours. And it's non-stop. Like, imagine how exhausting that is for people. And you're not talking normally. Like, I'm talking normally today into this microphone. But instead, you're having to be like loud at certain points because you're passing something really big and important, and then drop it down at certain times. Yeah. It's quite a physical thing. But my girlfriend found it hard, like when I would get home. So I'd come home straight away. And for the first half hour, that's what I was like. I'd be like, hi, I am home. Oh, my girlfriend, you are wonderful. Like Big Ben is wonderful. Blah, 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 blah. Half an hour later, I crashed.
Yeah.
And it would be like, I was pretty much silent for the rest of the night.
At this point, were you just using hand signals?
Just pointing at things.
The left.
I'm a very good pointer.
Yeah.
So as podcasts, you don't know quite how good my pointing is, but
Well, you are pointing with right now on both sides, so
both sides.
yeah.
It's confusing, but
Yeah.
it works.
So, okay, so
But-
on this subject of the adrenaline, it's a double-edged sword, is what you're saying.
It's a double-edged sword.
It's a good. The pointy end is good.
Yeah.
yeah. The positives so outweigh it.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge buzz being a tour guide, but I think for me it's not only that buzz, but it's also sort of feeling that you're learning more and more about London's rich history. So I sort of like think about it as like a tapestry, right? So the more you learn, the more you realize it becomes more of a full picture in your mind. So lots of different reasons why I love it. You know, the creation, it ticks so many boxes. The creation, just the fact that you're doing a job every day where on the whole, not every single time, but on the whole, 99% of people turn up in a good mood and looking for just to enhance their mood. And so, I mean, how many jobs can you say that for where you turn up for a job and everyone already is pretty happy?
Well, I stopped being a tour guide for 2 years, I think it was, and this is slightly before the pandemic. So at the Open Top Bus Company that I worked for, I moved up. So I became essentially one of the managers of the tour guides. So I became office-based. And I had a tiny little back office just to myself, just off Trafalgar Square, wonderful location. I can go and see the tour guides when I wanted. And I sat behind a computer all the time. And initially, it was very nice. I think it was winter time, so I was warm and cozy. I had my little heater. And as wonderful as tour guiding is, we all have this sort of dream that maybe a 9-to-5 job, like talk to us in February, we all go like, oh, a 9-to-5 job would be nice for a bit. Proves not to be the case.
Just to be clear, the reason being the instability of tour guiding work and the fact that,
Yeah, of just having like a schedule which is the same all the time, just being inside.
Oh,
Right,
it's all weather as well.
Yeah.
Oh,
but
especially when you're on an
open
top
top
bus as well.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. It's the coldest. Like I fairly regularly in the wintertime, I wore 3 coats, and multiple layer upon layer. I was like an onion. Like this layer upon layer upon where the inside was.
Just to be clear, onions make people cry. Were you making people cry on that bus?
Well, I've very dramatic tours, Jeremy. Thank you for saying. Laugh, you'll cry. Sometimes at the same times. But I found, even though I kind of enjoyed my new role and it's nice being kind of responsible for tour guides and all the good stuff that kind of came with it, but I would finish work at, it'd be like 5 o'clock. And there were other people in the building and I would say goodbye to them. So I had kind of colleagues and I'd walk home and I'd be like, I had this sense that I was missing something. So it was a combination of I'd forgotten something and also some sort of existential loss. And I'd get home and I'd be like, I'm kind of sad. I don't know why I'm sad. It's winter, that could be it. But I've been warm. I've had a good enough day. And then I realised after a few weeks is that no one had said, wow, Paul, that was great. No one had literally applauded my efforts.
Okay, I really want to get into the heart now of how you get a good tour to become a great tour. Now, we've touched on certain aspects of this, but I think especially as I've got Matt in the studio, and Matt for years and years has been running a company where he's created these tours from scratch. How many different tours are there that your company...
Currently, I think there are 8, but over the years we probably had maybe 20, 25 different tours.
Yeah, so if there's anyone really to start the conversation off about how to create a walking tour, because we talked a lot about your initial years on the buses, but both of you are essentially walking tour guides and have been for years doing walking tours. And as I say, Matt, you've crafted a lot of these tours which Paul actually himself gives. So Matt, let's start with you. What are the ways that you put together a tour? And answer me that question about how do we take it from a good tour to a really great tour? Because that's, I think, why your company has succeeded and why I've got you in here today. So tell us more.
Yeah, I think there are so many different elements to creating a good tour. I'm pretty sure when I talk to other people who create tours that I do it in a different way to others. So a lot of people will sort of maybe think of an area and then design the tour based on a particular kind of theme. Whereas usually for me, I would have just walked around areas and got to know all the different bits and pieces of a particular area over a period of years. And then an idea will come to me and I'll already pretty much have the route and the layout and the kind of stops that I want within that area. But it's almost like this moment where everything just falls into place after years of research. But I really do focus a lot on different strands to the tour. So the topography, stuff that maybe you wouldn't necessarily notice. So I'm not going to take a group and have a tour which just goes up and down a high street. You know, it's got to tuck down little alleyways, different kinds of vistas for people to look at, from big buildings to small little things. And then also the way that all the stops are put together as well, or the little bits of moments when we talk about the history or the locations. So I like them to vary. I like the style to vary. I like them to be varied in length, in the kind of story it is, whether you're focusing on something which is very close and very small, and then opening it up maybe at the next stop. So variety is really huge when I design these tours as well. Generally, there's a theme that runs through them as well. But yeah, there's a lot of work that goes into it. And with anything, if you become quite knowledgeable about a subject, you know, what you put into a tour should only be, you know, the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you actually know. So, you know, most of the streets that I would have walked down on my tours, perhaps I could have, talked about 5 or 6 different things instead of that if I felt like it. So to have that experience and that knowledge is really wonderful to draw on.
You also need to have that extra knowledge, because certain things can happen that means you have to say more or less. So, for example, it's very different if you have one person turning up for your walking tour. Because one person then, you know, it can feel a little bit awkward just kind of going to the same locations you always would go to and stand there with your audience of one, and we're going to stand there, let's say, in the rain for 5-6 minutes whilst you talk at that person. It makes a little bit more sense to kind of sort of walk and talk it a little bit more, and thus you need extra things. You need maybe other little locations you can go to, or elongate the tour. Whilst the other way around, if you have a massive group, now where I'm working at the moment, we have groups of, I think, 20, 25 maximum. Absolutely brilliant. But places I worked before, my record for a walking tour is 120 people. They didn't cap the groups. When I would turn up to work, however many people were there, that's the amount of people I took. So then the opposite is true. You have to start cutting stuff out. You have to start editing, because you get to a spot and then you have to wait 3 minutes for person number 120, who's half a mile away. You have to wait for them to catch up. So having or learning a tour or designing a tour is great, but you have to have a vast amount of flexibility in that.
The flexibility is huge, isn't it? And also just knowing your group as well. Like what you talked about before about knowing the kind of people you have in your group. So if you've got a tour and half the group are kids, you know, you're going to change the way that tour is delivered, of course. Yeah, it's really, that's such a key factor to leading a really good tour.
I think context, empathy, and not just knowledge of London. So like literally yesterday, lovely walking tour, essentially a private tour for a family from Germany, 3 generations. It was one when I would say a few sentences and then the teenage son would translate for the majority of the rest of the family. So it's quite hard tour guiding in that way to reduce your tour down, a stop where you would usually talk for 5 minutes and you are talking for 20 seconds because that's all anyone's actually going to be able to translate. So it's very important to give it some context.
Thinking about one of the most wonderful tours I've ever led, there was a guy who came on my Changing the Guard tour maybe 7-8 years ago, and he had an assistant. He was blind, and he was almost overcome at the end of the tour. He enjoyed it so much so that he hung around with me afterwards and then asked if I had another tour in the afternoon. said, yeah, I'm doing a tour around Smithfield. So we're going to be meeting up at 1:30 in the afternoon. Yeah, please feel free to come along. And that walk with the group and also with him was just beautiful. It got quite emotional, in fact. So I'd make a special point of, we actually went inside St. Bartholomew the Great Church, which, if you don't know that church, it's an absolutely gorgeous 12th century church in the city of London near to Barbican. And so we walked around together, and I was describing in far more detail than I'd ever had to describe.
I've done that a couple of times.
Oh,
wonderful.
And you just go around.
Wonderful.
We were sort of like, and he was saying, do you mind if you just show me where it is? So he put his hand on certain things around the church so he could feel the history and the beauty of the place. And my God, that was a stunningly beautiful tour. It was really life affirming when you have someone like that who comes on it, who just appreciates it to an nth degree.
We've gotten to the topic here of the sort of sensory nature of London, and especially something you've both experienced working with people who are visually impaired, and the necessity to kind of bring London to life in a non-visual way. I'm sure this happens to both of you. I often get asked by people, don't you get tired of doing the same thing? You know, I think a lot of people not in tour guiding think it's maybe like performing in a theatre when you get those West End shows where an actor has to do the same thing for 6 years, 6 days, 6 nights a week or whatever. For us, I would say many of us just do loads of different tours anyway. We do lots of different walking tours all over the place and even trips outside of London and so on. But I think what we're getting onto here is we can do the exact same tour, the exact same route, and yet it's an entirely different tour each time. Would that be a fair thing to say?
Not 100%. I think you also need, I used to call it the Screaming Baby Tour, the tour that you can give when everything else is going wrong. So your basic tour that you can give in any conditions. You know, if you've got the police helicopter is overhead because there's a big demonstration around the corner or something like that, and then 1,001 variations of it. So the ability to do that same one again and again and again, I think, is important. But then to be able to constantly change it, because it's the joy. Like, even though I kind of work for Matt, and he said, right, you need to do this tour roughly in this way, and these would be nice if these are the rough subjects, and this is where you're going. It's my tour. It's my tour, and I can bend it to any certain subjects that I like. And Matt was kind of sort of referring to this before. That it's interesting using tours almost as Trojan horses to sneak in all sorts of subjects you want to talk about, whatever you happen to be interested in at the moment, or something that's happening in the news, something a customer will say something, and then it spins off a different subject. If it was always exactly the same, I would find it tough, though.
Yeah. I am itching to hear about your Screaming Baby tour, as you put it, the one that the sort of fail-safe one. We're going to come on to this in a moment, actually. What would be your kind of your fail-safe ones and then also your quirky ones that you like to do? So we're going to come on to the topic of, it's a lovely segue, but I just want to throw in Matt, give him a chance to talk about this issue about the tours being different each time, or, you know, do you get bored of some tours, and with varying them, do you also have your fail-safe ones that Paul's mentioned?
Yeah. Again, I'm not sure if this is the way that most guides will lead a walking tour, but I'm pretty much improvise all the way through. I know I have the stock stories, I have the anecdotes and the background that I know I'm probably going to be talking about particular locations, but I think this goes back to being able to improvise, like from going back from the days of working on buses, but being able to really change the tour depending on what's going on around you. So, for instance, if you're going to do, when I was doing like ghost tours, and you'd invariably have like one or two drunk people turning up, and you can't just ignore them. You've got to somehow mention something about what's going on and about London's rich history and so forth. So you'd always find ways to alter the tour. So, as you know, compared to, say, somebody who's doing like a six-year stint on the West End, or say the Rolling Stones who've been playing the same songs for 60 years, that to me would be really tough.
I'm sure the money helps with the Rolling Stones.
Am I not paying you enough, Paul? Is that what you're saying?
Well, seemingly not.
Let's say a tribute act for Blur. I'm guessing their income's not going to be that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of a tribute act name Blurred. That would be a good one for them.
Blurred,
Anyway,
yes.
but I think with them, they're having to cover Blur, the classics songs by Blur, and they're not getting much back on the front.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be. You wouldn't want to be in Blurred, would you?
No, I would say I'd rather be a tour guide than being Blurred. Yes, if that's what the two choices are in life.
In fact,
If anyone from Blurred is listening, I'm afraid that career swap you were wanting to do with Matt, he's not up for it. So find another
that's
tour
actually
guide.
how
Stop
I
sending me
became a
letters.
tour guide. I was in Blurred, but then I saw the opportunities for experimentation, improvisation.
Right, we've explored a lot of ground about what makes a tour better. We've gone into many different avenues, but I think it's that moment in this podcast where we have to talk about things that have gone wrong, those mishaps, things that have happened to you or maybe things you've heard about because, well, in life things can go wrong. Have either of you ever had to kick someone off your tours?
Yes, I have. Not a walking tour, a bus tour, yes. And that it's happened twice. So, yeah, instantly remember. yes, I have. Man who wouldn't stop smoking on a bus tour. That was one. Kept on asking, kept on smoking. And another one were two people who really didn't want to be on the tour, but just wanted to get on the bus, which is kind of fair enough. But then were like screaming and shouting and having a bit of a party downstairs. And I kept on asking, excuse me, guys, I'm glad you're enjoying yourselves, blah, 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 blah. However, other people needed to tour. And after asking about 3 or 4 times, I had a word with the driver, and it's like, right, we are now going to stop, and we will not move off until you've left the bus.
Did they
Off you
leave? Were they still?
Yeah.
Did they carry the party onto the pavement outside, or
Probably did. They're probably still there now. God knows.
did you not think of
But,
dropping them off at, a sort of?
A jail straight away.
I was thinking more a pub, so they could have but I was thinking which pub it would be because there's certain pubs, we've got 3,000 of them. My brain is thinking which of the 3,000 London pubs would be appropriate for them. And I thought probably the 10 Bells. They would fit in well there.
Oh,
they'd take that there. But
Yeah.
all right, Matt, have you ever had to kick anyone off your tour?
I used to run a quiz tour.
Oh,
It was
wow.
called Liar Liar. And in the tour, I'd take people around the square mile, so around the city of London. And at each one of the places we would get to, I'd give them 3 so-called facts. 2 are true and 1's not true. And they're all quite sort of outlandish truths, or 2 of them were outlandish truths, and the third one seemed almost as likely or unlikely as the other 2. And the idea of this was that you'd get the whole group and you'd divide them up into teams. And it was really great for like kids. Kids would get involved and, it'd be quite competitive. But I remember in the reasonably early days of that tour, it took a while for it to really take off. And I had a couple on it. Just a couple.
What could go wrong?
So this is the first time I'd had a couple on it. So I thought, okay, why don't you compete against each other? Never again. So I asked them, so basically we get to each stop and I'd say, okay, do you think this one is the true one or this one is the true one? And I'll give 10 points to the person who got it right. First stop, the guy got it right. Second stop, the guy got it right and his wife got it wrong. It eventually got to the 7th stop and every single time the wife had got it wrong and the husband had got it right. And they were nearly coming to blows by that point. And it was deeply uncomfortable. It was like, I sort of almost feeling like, should we just change the rules now? But I just sort of put myself into that difficult situation. From that point onwards, I'd always just compete myself against the 2 people who did it. We also do a tour with Fun London Tours, which goes around Smithfield, goes past where the old Newgate prison used to be, and the Old Bailey, our Central Criminal Court. And sometimes, when I'm talking about the Central Criminal Court, I point out where the court cases take place and say, look, it's possible to go and visit. Has anyone ever been in the Old Bailey before?
Did you mean to visit?
To visit, yeah.
Obviously,
because usually people would say, occasionally you have someone, I did jury service there or something like that.
Or the public gallery. Sometimes people watch the trials, yeah.
Yeah.
And
on this occasion, one chap was in the group and he said, yeah, I've been in there. I've served my time, all right? And it's one of those that where you just don't know where to take it from there. It's literally, keep calm, carry on, smile. Okay, let's go and find a really beautiful garden around the corner.
Earlier on, Paul, you mentioned about having some fail-safe options in London. You called them is it the Crying Baby?
Crying Baby Tour.
The Crying Baby Tour. Can you just tell us a little bit more about where you would go?
Where I would go? I think it'd be... The temptation at this point is to mention something really obscure, to kind of sort of show off to my fellow tour guides who are in the room and fellow tour guides that are listening. But I'm going to go for something really obvious. In fact, probably the most obvious place in London, because it should be celebrated and we should always remember that the basics are really the reason people come here. Ticking things off of a list is something that should be celebrated rather than being looked down upon. And that's Parliament Square. Just to be in Parliament Square. A trip to London is not complete without it for an awful lot of people. And even those people, like customers or just like visitors to London, who will go like, oh no, I don't need to see Big Ben. I don't need that because I'm a tourist. I'm not a tourist. Anyone who feels they're marginally insulted when you might say that they're a tourist, when you're truly there and you're at Westminster Abbey and you're truly realising the depth of history that's there, and also even just the majesty of the buildings, or as tour guides, the niche stuff is amazing and it is really good. But we always remember like the majesty of the big obvious stuff.
I think you're right. I remember Anthony Bourdain, the writer, cook and whatever, I remember him just saying, learn how to make a really good tomato sauce, good tomato sauce. And I think Parliament Square is the tomato sauce as well, because it's like most people are going to enjoy that. And going back to your point as well, Big Ben pleases someone that maybe wants that picture to make it all complete. But you threw in then Westminster Abbey and the majesty of Parliament. There's something for everyone there, I think, isn't there?
It's more. When I trained tour guides, I spent a fairly short amount of time because then the pandemic hit, but there was a while that I trained tour guides for the bus company that I worked for. A big thing for me was, what is it? What's the thing we're looking at? Why should anybody care? And then what's the extra special sauce? What's the extra thing? What's the thing that they don't know? What's the thing that's going to blow their minds? What's the thing that's going to go off on some strange tangent? What's the weird and wonderful thing? And as long as you've got all three, so it's not just going like,
that's a brilliant formula.
Houses of Parliament. It's like 1, 2, 3, and then next 1, 2, 3.
That's
tour guiding. If you narrow it down to its bare, beautiful essentials. That's it. Why should anyone care? And I do see some tour guides who, when they're giving their tours, and this is not anyone that I've worked with, but you overhear people's tours and things, and particularly those that have been doing it a long time. This is can be a bit of a problem for those that are lifers, which I guess I am now as well. They assume that people do care. Say, no, why should we care? It's not obvious. And if you think it's obvious, then still, like, what's amazing about this? That don't just assume that as customers are with you and that are on your tour, that they should really care about what you're saying.
Okay, so Parliament Square is your fail-safe, and I think you've outlined very well why that is a fail-safe. Even the Screaming Baby is there, but people don't mind. They've got these wonderful buildings and statues and the Abbey and so on. Now, Matt, do you have a fail-safe? If so, where would it be in London that you think, that's the one you can kind of lean on?
I'm really fortunate because during the last year I've lived in the Barbican, and before I lived there, I thought to myself, I always would love to live there. It's if you don't know the Barbican, it's like a stone's throw from St. Paul's Cathedral, and is this brutalist housing estate in the centre of the city of London. But it's absolutely gorgeous, and I really appreciate the fact that I think as tour guides we sort of understand that the intricacy and the detail in everything around us, the more you look into it, the more interesting it becomes. So Barbican, for instance, quite often it's people describe it as almost like Marmite, so you love it or you hate it. And a lot of people will maybe start a tour near to the Barbican and say, oh, what an ugly building that is. But the more you find out about it, the more you look into it, and the longer you live there, you realise this is a truly special place. The architecture, the detail, the effort that went into all the design. And for me personally, like growing up in the 80s, it's got that sort of 70s, 80s feel that I was very familiar with when I was young as well. So it's got that kind of homely sense about it, with the sort of the browns and the oranges and the thick carpets. But it's a truly, truly special place. Given that, I've lived in the Barbican for a year now. Another great thing is that St. Paul's Cathedral is on the doorstep. So if I'm going to go for a walk or go for a run, then I'm literally just around the corner from St. Paul's, and I never get tired of the fact that is around the corner from where I live. And it's truly magical. I'll just often just sit on the steps of St. Paul's Cathedral and just watch the world around me and just imagine the last 350 years in that site of that amazing cathedral.
This is all brilliant in outlining where's fail-safe for you. To go for your jogs and your wanders, and even to live, and you've got the carpets and those colour tones of the 70s, 80s. I'm thinking Del Boy and Only Fools and Horses carpets and decoration. I get all that familiarity to you. Does that rub off on others then, if you've brought others round there? And Paul's mentioned a place, Parliament Square, that really would appeal to everyone. Is this your kind of fail-safe, but for a certain niche?
I suppose that's for a certain niche. But then I also think that if you have a real passion for something, if you can show people a side to somewhere that really excites you and really enthuses you, I think it will rub off on the people that you show it to. But I mean, I suppose if you were to think of somewhere which is maybe more of a somewhere which ticks a lot of boxes, then you've got Trafalgar Square. Trafalgar Square is, it's a place where things happen. It's a kind of you've got Parliament Square, which is a very historical, important, crucial location in London, but Trafalgar Square is the place where people hang out, where there are protests, where there are people, everyone can kind of associate and understand it from that very social perspective. So that would be another sort of more general kind of location that I could probably think of.
I want to finish with both of you giving just some recommendations for someone who's listening to this that's not a tour guide, that has ended up listening to this thinking, oh, is this the club for me? Is this something? Do these experts that Jeremy's got on have some words of wisdom to add to the enormous amount of wisdom they've already shared? So into some closing remarks, what would you say to wannabe tour guides getting into it?
I would say get out there, kind of put in the miles. It's kind of what Matt was mentioning before about how he creates tours that just walking and walking and walking, and as something you enjoy. So I used to, before I truly became a guide, became obsessed with knowing every street in the city of London, which is like the old historic core. There's not that many streets, but it's an area that most Londoners don't know their way around unless they work there, because it's business district as well, but also there's more history there than anywhere. So every single weekend, and this is not for me going like, I want to be a tour guide, so I will do this. I was doing this anyway. This is my form of entertainment on a Sunday. So I would get up early and I'd go for a walk. I'd be like, oh, what's around this? I've never been down that street. Go down that street. Just explore. That's the big thing. Explore, explore, explore. Physically, by putting in the miles, by trying to walk everywhere, But, if there's a documentary on TV about a subject that might have something vaguely to do with something that a tour guide might talk about, don't go, oh, I'll watch it sometime in the future. Watch it today. Just get into it. Get into it before, and then when professional opportunities arise, so be it a job advert or a tour guide and their company is looking for tour guides and maybe you could try out or things like that, you've done half of it already by being interested in things and being out and about. They are probably my top tips.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I think absolutely echo what Paul is saying there. I'd also say that, just throw yourself into it. Just take a chance. There are lots of tour companies out there. But since the pandemic, the number of tour companies out there has really multiplied. So you've got free walking tour companies and open top bus tours. It seems to be always recruiting. So I would say just really, if you feel that it's something that you're passionate about, but you're not too sure about the public speaking, for instance, sometimes to overcome that is just to really go for it. And if you already have the interest in the history, then I think the rest can follow. There are also just so many great talks and societies and places where you can visit in London. So there's so much you can just study, because London has so much to offer all the time.
Well, on that, can I say thank you, Matt? Thank you, Paul. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast. I'm sure at some point you'll be back, but it's rare to see you indoors. That's thank you to Paul Harrison.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy.
And that's thank you to Matt Gedge.
Thank you.
And thanks, of course, to you, the lovely listeners, for tuning in. Until the next one, take care. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast episode, then it would be a huge help if you could send it to your friends, your family, acquaintances, maybe even your enemies. Maybe don't send it to your enemies, but send it to as many people as you know. And also another huge help is to click subscribe or follow on your podcast app. And also, if there's a button that says 5 stars or like, that would also be really appreciated. Thank you.